All right. I wanted to take a look at the last pages of this social distancing law assessment template. So everything, and this is from July 2010, but they were working on this project before that in order to make this document. But anyway, everything that we are seeing put before us today has already been outlined in this social distancing law project. Yeah, everything from the shutting down of stores, not, telling people they can't gather, shutting down the schools. Everything is in this document that they have tried to plan out for us. And I would dare to say that this is a simulation of this, or, whatever. It's okay, here it is. So you've seen these sections, except for the mass prophylaxis, legal readiness. So yeah, restriction of movement, interjurisdictional cooperation and restricted movement of persons, closure of public places, dismissal of schools, and cancellation of mass gatherings. So we've seen all that. Now, I don't know how each state, I'm sure there's holes in this because this is an outline, and I don't know if each state did their homework, because in the last video I mentioned on which states participated in this activity. Okay, so there's the scenario. I wanted to go down here to the paper. Oh, here is about the PPE. Talking points captured during discussions. The following points were captured during table and group discussions. Actions and considerations. Personal protective equipment. Anyway, there was another section here where it said here it is. What if public PPE is not worn if required? So these were questions that I think Michigan had, or what have you. What happens if people don't wear the PPE, right here. See? So they planned that from before time as well. Okay. And another thing I was wondering was that how come we don't have diarrhea pandemics? It's usually always an upper respiratory pandemic, right? That they're expecting. So what is it that they're doing that they're expecting that, What are they doing to our environment? Why are they expecting that everyone's just going to become very ill and die? So all right, I want to go down to this paper. The Social Distancing Law Project Template, a method of jurisdictions to assess understanding of relevant legal authorities. Okay. Recent events have validated predictions that the recurrence of an influenza pandemic was not an issue of if, but when. We've heard that before. Nearly 100 years since 1918, health officials continue to monitor new and reemerging infections, such as H5N1, for genetic and antigenic variation and for indications of more efficient human-to-human spread. Even if influenza A does not ultimately transform into a pandemic-causing virus, the risk of pandemic has been considered inevitable. So they're saying it's just inevitable. And with the widespread emergence of the novel influenza A H1N1 in 2009, now realized responding to such events could require a spectrum of pharma and non-pharma interventions, including social distancing measures such as quarantine, isolation, closing businesses, and canceling public events. Such law-based and legally enforced community-wide infection control measures, however, have not been widely used in the United States since the first half of the 20th century. So they acknowledge, oh boy, how did we ever make it without these things being used? Crazy. The continued threat of a widespread influenza pandemic, including H5N1 and H1N1, has necessitated taking a fresh look at these measures and their legal basis. The federal and state governments have shared interests in ensuring that public health professionals are competent in the use of law to use social distancing measures. Two strategically significant documents, the National Strategy for Pandemic Influenza from 2005 and the 2006 Pandemic Influenza Implementation Plan, developed by the U.S. Homeland Security Council, emphasize the important role that social distancing measures would have in helping to minimize the impact of pandemic influenza. The documents also highlighted the need for governments at all levels to assess their legal capacity to flexibly respond to shifting circumstances, flexing and shifting during a pandemic. In particular, the Homeland Security Council tasked the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services with providing guidance to all levels of government, quote, on the range of options for infection control and contaminant, including those circumstances where social distancing measures, limitations on gatherings, or quarantine authority may be appropriate public health intervention. Despite the need for states to thoroughly and systematically review and test their relevant legal authorities, no method existed. Okay, so they're saying states needed to do this. They needed to test to see if this is even legal. And they're saying no method for this existed. That's why they created this whole wonderful spreadsheet with a bunch of questions that states could sit there and answer. And they wanted them to tighten up the legal part so they can throw this on us. So only a tool for assessing legislative provisions more broadly, the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act. To address the mandates and needs, the Center for Disease Control created a method for states and other jurisdictions to assess their understanding of laws authorizing the use of social distancing measures in response to a pandemic of influenza or other communicable respiratory disease. Why is it always respiratory disease? Why can't it be a butt disease or leprosy? The CDC's public health law program collaborated with ASTHO to implement the method of 17 jurisdictions, chosen in part based on their proximity to CDC quarantine stations. This method, the Social Distancing Law Project, was designed to help jurisdictions use a formulaic approach to assess their officials' understanding of law authorizing social distancing measures. The template for the assessment comprises of a set of questions for conducting a structural review of relevant law, creating a table of authorities, and implementing a hypothetical scenario as a tabletop exercise for testing officials' understanding of pertinent laws. I hate to be them, having to answer all those questions. The military has used simulation games. The military? Okay. To improve its preparedness levels for centuries. Hey, I bet we're one big simulation game. Probably. A tool also adopted by the federal government in recent years to evaluate participants' understanding of their roles and responsibilities through tabletop exercises and preparedness. Other studies have illustrated the beneficial impact of tabletop exercises to improve participants' competencies for applying legal authorities for public health emergencies. In this article, we summarize the SDLP, Social Distancing Law Project method. I hate when my computer's okay. And its implementation by 17 jurisdictions, and we report the experience of only one participating jurisdiction. I wonder why that is. How come the other ones didn't report their experience? So only Michigan did. Only Michigan agreed to allow them to share their materials as a case example for other states and jurisdictions that may elect to use SDLP as a tool for addressing their legal preparedness for pandemic influenza. And the states that participated did get a grant. I think they did get money. We also describe the SDLP template, the practical tool developed for the purpose of assisting other jurisdictions. The SDLP was designed to assist jurisdictions in addressing the 4 core elements of public health emergency legal preparedness as outlined in the National Action Agenda for Public Health Legal Preparedness. Laws and authorities essential for implementing social distancing measures, competencies to apply such authorities, cross-jurisdictional and cross-sector coordination, and information best practices as integral facets of pandemic preparedness. All right, so methods. The CDC identified 17 jurisdictions by selecting from among states or territories, I already said this, that are close to quarantine stations. Generally, CDC quarantine stations are charged with responding to illness or deaths on airplanes or other conveyances at points of entry and working with federal, state, and local partners on preparedness activities related to quarantine and isolation. This selection criterion was important because it encompassed the roles of quarantine stations and pandemic multi-jurisdictional issues and the likelihood for strengthening interactions and coordination among the people involved in such a response. Practical constraints limited the implementation of the project's method to some jurisdictions having or bordering states with the CDC quarantine stations. Again, Alaska, California, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. An important feature of this project was to engage people, the state health official and state health agency legal counsel, and public health preparedness staff to assess their jurisdiction's applicable laws. This approach maximized the identification and interpretation of these laws by the officials who bear primary responsibilities for these. And okay, I just want to stop and say something that Carl Miller talks about construing the law or construing the Constitution in your favor. And I don't have it on me right now, but yes, the Constitution is to be construed in your favor because you are a beneficiary of that contract. What happened? As long as you don't scream or anything. Okay? All right. So yeah, anyways, let's see, I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so this is stuff we already read. They conduct a legal assessment of relevant applicable laws. Second, they select a subset of the jurisdiction would follow the legal assessment by convening a legal consultation meeting. The purpose of the legal assessment was to create a consistent approach for all participating jurisdictions. Okay. Of the 17 jurisdictions, 11 also conducted legal consultation meetings. All right. Let's go to the results. Case example, Michigan. Officials in Michigan used the guidance from the CDC and ASTO to conduct a legal assessment and a legal counsel meeting. In summer 2007, the Michigan Department of Community Health established a 12-member project team to plan and implement SDLP. Team members represented key MDCH functional and program areas. The Michigan Department of Attorney General and officer in charge of the CDC quarantine station at the Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport. The MDCH Legal Affairs Director and an attorney served as project manager. The legal assessment. In addition to the attorney's other project... Dylan, stop. In addition to the attorney's other project, team members assisted in conducting research for or prepared the legal assessment or both, including emergency management staff, communicable disease staff, and physician. Let's see. Work was distributed among committee members who identified information and prepared responses to questions about legal powers during and absent a declared emergency. I don't know why they want to know their legal powers in the absence of a declared emergency. Let's see here.
There's a lake about there.
Okay, the exercise also led to the development of procedures, particularly for social distancing measures that implicate constitutional rights of due process, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech and assembly. In this regard, the Michigan Public Health Code does not specify procedures to provide due process when the state health director issues an emergency order that deprives individuals of their constitutional rights. Michigan has drafted potential rules to provide due process, which has been submitted for review by the Michigan Pandemic Influenza Coordinating Committee. Blah, blah, blah. These people have the longest names ever. Compensation for private property taken for the common good also surfaced as an issue needing further review. Ooh. They're getting into that stuff. I don't like that. The assessment highlighted the importance of policy and ethical considerations as well as legal issues in planning and implementing response measures to pandemic influenza. The Michigan team cited potential examples such as ordering businesses to close with resulting income losses to the business owners and the loss of income for a single mother who has been directed into home quarantine because she was exposed to acutely ill passengers while on a commercial airliner, but she has no sick leave. The assessment also helped MDCH and others in identifying potential gaps in response plans involving particular law-based measures, mass transit limitations, and curfew, and some logistical challenges, including those associated with enforcement of measures. Some areas that were deemed in need of further review with other government partners included implementation of social distancing measures involving Michigan's public universities, which under the state's constitution are a branch of state government, autonomous within their own spheres of authority. Wow. On federal lands and on Indian land. The written assessment provided a record of legal issues that have been and still need to be addressed. All right. So let's read their conclusions. Michigan and the other participating jurisdictions found that they have sufficient, although not uniform, legal authorities to address pandemic influenza preparedness. project jurisdictions also identified potential problem areas within their legal and operational capacities that they are now addressing. All states that participated in the original project reported that the exercise was beneficial to their preparedness efforts. Georgia found the method so valuable that it replicated the project at the local level in 3 jurisdictions. Virginia has posted the materials from its legal assessment and legal consultation meeting online to share with other interested jurisdictions. Oh, that should be interesting to look up. Although every participating jurisdiction had a slightly different experience with the project, all reported that the exercise was valuable to their preparedness. The specific examples from Michigan are generally representative of the kinds of issues and lessons learned in the other jurisdictions. The CDC and ASDO agreed not to publish project materials and results without the jurisdiction's consent. About the authors. So Ms. Lieb and Dr. Goodman are with the Public Health Law Program for the CDC. Ms. Chrysler is with the Michigan Department of Community Health. Correspondence, people from the CDC. Financial disclosures. During the course of this project, Mr. Lieb was employed by ASTHO. Hello, computer. Okay. This is other stuff I've been reading. Diffusion of gases, about the physics of the exchange of the gases in our lungs. Which was interesting over here was the things that cause shortness of breath. Some things that cause shortness of breath are the where is it? Membrane. Okay, factors that affect the rate of diffusion. There are many properties which can affect the rate of diffusion in the lungs. Membrane thickness. The thinner the membrane, the faster the rate of diffusion. The diffusion barrier in the lungs is extremely thin. However, some conditions cause thickening of the barrier, thereby impairing diffusion. So examples include fluid in the interstitial space or thickening of the alveolar membrane. So that can cause shortness of breath. If you look that up, it's pulmonary edema, and this thickening of it, it causes shortness of breath. Membrane surface area. The larger the surface area, the faster the rate of diffusion. The lungs normally have a very large surface area for gas exchange due to the alveoli. Diseases such as emphysema lead to the destruction of the alveolar architecture, leading to formation of large air-filled spaces known as bullae. This reduces the surface area available and slows the rate of gas exchange, thus causing shortness of breath. I wonder if wearing masks can contribute to any of this. Because this is how these people are tricky. This is what they do with vaccines too. They say, oh, vaccines don't cause this or don't cause that. Well, it's like you have to say wearing a lung causes this, which causes that, and then causes that. Because they're so tricky. Okay, now this thing is moving. Let's see. Oh yeah, I was going to read the financial disclosures. During the course of the project, Mr. Lieb was employed by ASTHO and Ms. Chrysler was employed by Michigan Health and received a stipend from ASTHO to conduct the project, and Dr. Goodman was employed by the CDC. During the writing of the article, Ms. Lieb was employed by the CDC, Ms. Chrysler is still employed by Michigan Health, and Dr. Goodman is still employed by the CDC. Funds for the social distancing law project were provided by the CDC and applied to support the project through an agreement between the CDC and ASDO. So that's that. I guess, I just said all that just to show that, it was all written. And like people say that everything that is done, it's out there. It's not anything that wasn't put out there, but we just maybe weren't looking. But, I believe we can still win through the support and the protection of our rights through the Constitution. I think it's just crazy that we actually have to defend our right to not cover our nose and face. It's just really weird.